You're dead. It happened fast. Maybe it was a battle, a fever, or simply old age arriving without warning. But now you're standing somewhere unfamiliar. The world around you is gray, the air is still, and somewhere ahead, through the cold mist, you can hear the sound of slow, dark water moving. You walk forward, not because you want to, but because something pulls you. And then you see it, a wide, black river, stretching endlessly in both directions. No bridge, no stepping stones, just still, dark water that seems to go on forever. And there on the water, a boat, small, old, barely seaworthy, and at the oar stands a figure, tall, hunched. Eyes burning like two coals deep in the sockets of an ancient weathered face. He doesn't call to you, he doesn't wave, he just watches. That figure is Charon, the ferryman of the dead. And before you take another step, you need to check your pockets. Because if you don't have the coin, you're not getting on that boat.
Welcome back to the channel. Today we're crossing into the darkest corner of Greek mythology, a place where silence is permanent and where even the gods think twice before approaching. We're talking about Charon, the silent ferryman who stood guard at the most profitable and most final border in all of existence, the line between life and death.
To understand who Charon really is, we need to go back, far back, before Zeus ever sat on his throne on Mount Olympus, before the Titans were even a thought. We need to go back to the very beginning of everything, to a time when the universe was nothing but a vast, endless darkness. In that darkness lived two primordial forces, Erebus, the god of pure, absolute darkness, and Nyx, the goddess of night herself. These weren't gods in the typical Greek sense. They weren't powerful personalities with dramatic love affairs and human-like emotions. They were forces, concepts made real, the raw building blocks of a universe still figuring itself out. And from that union of darkness and night, Charon was born. Think about what that means for a moment. Charon didn't just work in shadow, he was born from it. He didn't just live in the realm of death, he predated the gods who would eventually rule it. When Zeus was still a child, hiding from his father Cronus in a cave, Charon was already there, pole in hand, guiding souls across the black water. He had siblings too, and what a family it was. His brothers and sisters included Thanatos, the gentle god of death, Hypnos, the god of sleep, Nemesis, the spirit of divine vengeance, and Eris, the goddess of strife and chaos. Every single one of them was born of darkness. Every single one of them served the world's most uncomfortable truths. But Charon had perhaps the most intimate relationship with those truths of all, because while Thanatos was death, Charon was what came next. He was the transition, the movement from what you were to whatever you were about to become.
Now, picture the world Charon inhabits. The ancient Greeks believed the underworld wasn't simply underground, it was a fully realized realm, with its own geography, its own rivers, its own rules. And getting there wasn't instant. When you died, the god Hermes, in his role as psychopomp, meaning guide of souls, would escort your spirit down from the world of the living to the edge of a river. The Greeks called it the Acheron, the river of woe. Some later writers would call it the Styx, the river of hate. Either way, the idea was the same, a boundary, a line drawn by the universe between the warm light of the living world and the cold, permanent silence of what lay beyond. On one bank, the living world. On the other, Hades. And in between, the water. And on the water, Charon. Ancient writers described the scene in breathtaking terms. Imagine standing on that shore, souls crowding around you, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all pressing toward the water's edge, arms outstretched, desperate to cross. Mothers, warriors, children, kings, all equal here, all equally helpless. The Roman poet Virgil compared the scene to leaves falling from trees in the first frost of autumn. That's how many souls were waiting. That's how relentless death truly was. And Charon didn't rush. He took some, turned away others. His rules were ancient and absolute, and no amount of begging would change them.
So what did this gatekeeper actually look like? The ancient Greeks were not kind with their description. Virgil, who gave us perhaps the most vivid portrait of Charon in all of literature, described him as appallingly filthy, with a bush of unkempt white beard upon his chin and eyes like jets of fire. His cloak dragged down from his shoulders, knotted and dirty. His boat was the color of rust. And yet, despite all of that age and grime, Virgil was careful to add something crucial. A god's old age, he said, is green and sappy. Charon was ancient, yes, but he was absolutely not weak. Seneca, writing his tragedy Hercules Furens, described the ferryman as clad in foul garb, his cheeks haggard and sunken, his beard hanging unkempt. He stood at the back of his boat with a long pole, directing the craft across the black water with the silent efficiency of someone who has done the same job since before memory began. Greek vase paintings from the 5th century BC show him as a bearded older man wearing a conical hat, standing in his skiff, ready to receive the newly dead from Hermes himself. There's a painting from the National Archaeological Museum in Athens that shows this exact moment. Hermes handing a shade to Charon, the soul looking small and uncertain, Charon towering and unmoved. And yet, for all his ugliness and his silence, Charon was not cruel. He was simply exact. He had a job, a very specific, very eternal job. And he did it without sentiment, without delay, and, most importantly, without exceptions. Well, almost without exceptions. Here's where things get fascinating, because what Charon required wasn't strength or virtue or a noble bloodline. What he required was something every ordinary person could theoretically possess: a single coin. One small, simple coin. The ancient Greeks called it an obol. It was worth 1/6 of a drachma, barely enough to buy a loaf of bread at the market. Not valuable by any standard of the living world, but in the economy of the dead, it was everything. This coin was placed in the mouth of the deceased before burial, right there in the mouth,
tucked between the lips before the body was prepared and laid to rest. It was one of the most universally practiced funerary rituals in the ancient Greek world. Archaeologists have discovered examples of this from burial sites across the entire Mediterranean. Coins placed in or near the mouths of the dead, sometimes made of silver, sometimes made of thin gold foil, sometimes simply made of whatever the family could afford. Think about what this ritual reveals about Greek society. It tells us that no matter who you were in life, king or slave, hero or farmer, the moment you died, the rules became the same. Death was democratic in that particular way. You needed that coin. Without it, Charon wouldn't move. And the consequences of arriving coinless were devastating. Those who had not been given proper burial rites, those whose families hadn't performed the ceremony, those whose bodies lay unburied on a battlefield somewhere, they couldn't pay, and Charon would not take them. So they waited on the bank of the Acheron, 100 years. 100 years of wandering the borderlands between the living world and the dead one. Not quite a ghost, not quite a shade, just stuck. Ancient sources describe these lost souls haunting the earth, appearing to the living as restless spirits, unable to find peace because no one had given them the coin they needed to continue their journey. It's a haunting thought, isn't it? And it explains so much about why the ancient Greeks took burial rites so seriously. Leaving a body unburied wasn't just disrespectful, it was a cosmic cruelty. You were condemning that person to a century of limbo. Now, Charon was by all accounts one of the most stubbornly consistent figures in all of Greek mythology. His rules didn't bend, his expression didn't soften, his arms didn't open wide in welcome. He was the wall between two worlds, and walls don't negotiate. But here's the thing about Greek heroes. They have a remarkable habit of showing up precisely where they're not supposed to be. What happens when the greatest musician who ever lived stands at the edge of that dark river with no coin, only a lyre, and starts to play? What happens when a man who was literally called the strongest mortal on earth decides that Charon's rules don't apply to him? What happens when a hero arrives with a golden branch that makes even the dead step aside in awe? Orpheus, Heracles, Aeneas, Psyche. These are the ones who looked Charon in the eye and refused to take no for an answer. And the stories of how each of them handled that silent ferryman tell us more about the nature of human ambition, love, and mortality than almost anything else in Greek mythology.
The first is Orpheus, and if you've followed this channel for a while, you already know his name. The greatest musician in all of Greek mythology, a man whose music could move trees, calm rivers, and make stones weep. His wife, Eurydice, died suddenly, bitten by a serpent on what should have been the happiest day of her life. And Orpheus, consumed by grief so total and so raw that it simply could not contain itself, decided to do the one thing no mortal was supposed to do. He went down. He descended into the underworld while still alive, walking through caverns, past shadows, past the haunted edges of the Acheron, until he reached the shore where Charon kept his post. Now, Charon had seen bold visitors before, but Orpheus didn't come with brute strength or sacred objects. He came with a lyre, and he started to play. The ancient writers tell us that Charon, that grim, unmoving, fire-eyed figure who had transported souls since before the Olympians were born, actually stopped. The oar went still, the dark water calmed, and something in the music reached into whatever existed in the ferryman's ancient chest instead of a heart and made it stir. Charon led him on the boat. Think about how extraordinary that is. Charon, who turned away the unburied without a second glance, who demanded his coin without sentiment, who stood unmoved against the combined grief of every soul who had ever died, was undone by a melody. The story of Orpheus doesn't end well, of course. He brought Eurydice back to the shores of the living world, and in one heartbreaking moment of doubt, looked back and lost her forever. When he returned to the river, pleading with Charon to let him cross again, the ferryman refused. No second chances. The rules of the underworld, once bent, would not bend twice. Ovid tells us Orpheus sat on the bank for 7 days, untended and fasting, grief and tears his only nourishment. Even music, it turned out, had its limits. Where Orpheus used beauty, Heracles used something considerably less poetic. Heracles, the greatest hero of the ancient world, demigod son of Zeus, the man who had already strangled a lion with his bare hands, killed a 9-headed hydra, and cleaned stables that hadn't been touched in 30 years, arrived at the Acheron for his 12th and final labor. His mission? Descend into the underworld and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed dog who guarded Hades' gates. He had no coin, he had no music, he had no sacred talisman. What he had was an absolutely legendary scowl. Seneca describes the scene vividly. Charon ordered Heracles to halt, shouted at him from the water, warned him that the living had no place here. And Heracles, who had not come this far to be stopped by a boat, simply grabbed Charon's own pole and used it to overpower the ferryman, climbing aboard and commandeering the vessel entirely. It's one of the most quietly humiliating moments in all of mythology. Charon, the eternal gatekeeper, being beaten with his own rowing stick by a very impatient man with a lion's skin cloak. But here's what the story doesn't always tell. When Charon returned to Hades and reported what had happened, he was punished. 1 year in chains. Because the rules of the underworld, no matter who violated them, carried consequences. Even the boundary between life and death had a manager, and that manager answered to Hades. Charon wasn't the boss, he was the employee, and he paid the price for letting the rules be broken.
The Trojan hero Aeneas took a different approach entirely. In Virgil's Aeneid, Aeneas descends to the underworld to find his dead father and learn of Rome's future. He travels with the Chamaean Sibyl, one of the most powerful prophetic figures in all of antiquity, who has directed him to find a golden bough before the journey begins. When they reached Charon's shore, the ferryman came out swinging. He shouted at them from the water, "Who are you? Why are you here? The living don't belong on my boat." And he lists, almost bitterly, the other living visitors who had caused him trouble: Theseus, Pirithous, Heracles. You could hear the exhaustion in it, the accumulated resentment of a being who was very, very tired of mortals showing up uninvited. But then the Sibyl stepped forward and showed him the golden bough, and Charon went silent. The bough was a divine object, a symbol of fate's permission, proof that the gods themselves had sanctioned this crossing. Charon, who would not bend for grief or brute force, was utterly stopped by sacred authority. He turned the boat around without another word, displaced the souls already seated on the benches, and rowed Aeneas across. The ramshackle craft, ancient as it was, groaned under the weight of a living man. 3 heroes, 3 different approaches. Music softened Charon. Force overwhelmed him. Sacred permission silenced him. The message underneath it all? The only way past death is to either touch its heart, defy its body, or have heaven on your side.
There's one more visitor worth naming, and she's perhaps the most unlikely of all. Psyche was a mortal woman tasked by the goddess Aphrodite with a series of nearly impossible missions. One of them required her to descend into the underworld and retrieve something from Persephone herself. She was given careful instructions for the crossing, including 2 coins, 1 for each way. And unlike Orpheus or Heracles or Aeneas,
Psyche didn't charm Charon or overpower him or wave a golden branch. She simply paid. 2 obols, 1 coin for the crossing in, 1 coin for the crossing back. Quiet, ordinary, transactional, the way Charon always preferred it. Her story is a fascinating contrast. The coin, which in a funeral setting symbolized the end of everything, became in her hands a symbol of survival. Proof that even in the realm of the dead, the right preparation and the right fare could see you safely through. So what does Charon ultimately mean? Why did a culture as sophisticated and emotionally rich as ancient Greece choose to place a grim old ferryman at the center of their afterlife? Not a judge, not a warrior, not a god of blazing power. Because Charon tells the truth about death in a way that nothing else can. He tells us that it doesn't matter what you achieved, who you loved, what battles you won. At the end, you stand at the water's edge like everyone else. You need your coin, and you wait your turn. But there's something quietly beautiful buried in that truth too. The obol in the mouth of the dead wasn't just a payment. It was a final act of love. It was a family saying, "We did not leave you unprepared. We gave you what you needed for the journey. We made sure Charon's boat will take you." In a world where death was everywhere and medicine was almost nowhere, that small coin was the most powerful thing the living could offer the dead. It was their way of saying, "We cannot follow you, but we made sure you won't be stranded. We made sure Charon's boat will take you home." And that image of a family pressing a coin into the lips of someone they loved before the last goodbye is the thing that has stayed with me longest after all the research I did for this video. Charon is ancient. Charon is dark. Charon is, by any measure, a terrifying figure to encounter. But underneath the fire eyes and the unkempt beard and the rust-colored boat, he represented something deeply human. The belief that even death has a process, that even the darkest crossing can be navigated, and that the people who love you will make sure you're ready for it. If you made it this far, thank you, genuinely. This channel runs on people who care about these stories as much as I do. So if this video moved you or taught you something new, the greatest thing you can do right now is hit that like button. It tells YouTube this story is worth sharing, and it helps this channel reach more people who love mythology as much as we do. If you're new here, welcome. Subscribe and ring the bell because we cover one Greek myth at a time, and every single video is a deep dive just like this one. Medusa, Lamia, Aphrodite, the Tumasian fox, they're all waiting for you in the archive. And leave a comment below. I want to know which of the heroes' encounters with Charon hit you the hardest. Was it Orpheus sitting on that bank for 7 days? Was it Heracles grabbing the pole? Or was it Psyche, the ordinary woman who simply paid the fare and got the job done? Tell me down there. I read every single one. Until next time, don't forget your coin.